Hello and welcome to another great shout, Marketing Growth Interviews. I'm Ed Davidson. I'm a fractional head of marketing and your host for this series. And this series is all about marketing and growth as a company evolves from a startup to a scale up. These are nice warts and all interviews with marketing leaders and business owners who have been through this process. And we hope it's really useful for CEOs and founders who are going from that startup to scale up phase. And today we've got Eamon. Hi there, Eamon. Eamon's got a huge amount of experience. He's helped launch Experience consumer growth business in the UK and then the ad tech business. He's run his own London-based growth agencies, including working with AOL and Virgin, Vision DNA. And then he founded Motivee, the startup focused on boosting engagement as well. He exited that business. And now he's got involved in investing and working with the UK government and being, as I know him, a real ambassador for Wales and Wales startup scene, especially including FinTech Wales. And then alongside that, he's helping international businesses locate to the UK and running a consulting business called Huel. Is that the best way of pronouncing it?
Hoyle.
Hoyle, there we go, which means energy and motivation. So, Eamon, welcome.
Thanks, Ed. How you doing?
Good, thanks. All good. Well,
Good.
look, the first question I start here with to kind of baseline where we are is, how do you define when a startup moves to that scale-up phase?
Wow. You've gone straight in there.
Yep.
Startup to scale up. It's a question, I don't know, that you ask different people, you'll get different answers. I think you'll ask American companies, industries, ecosystems versus London versus outside London, you get different things. I love an analogy. So one of the analogies I've recently been using is Great British Bake Off. So the startup phase for me is the phase where you're experimenting. So on Great British Bake Off, you see these chefs, these wannabe creators. They've got ideas. They think, this is going to taste really good. If I put it like this, it's going to really work. And then some of them are amazing. Some of them you're like, wow, like how did you creatively think that it works? Others are a complete disaster. It implodes. It doesn't work. They need to change. They need to do a different ingredient. They're pivoting their recipe. So pivot is happening for me just in the startup phase. And then they lock it in. Then they get the recipe and it's perfect. And for me, you're then entering the scale-up phase. So the recipe works. You know the right ingredients, the right amounts, you know the right numbers for everything. And then it's scaling that up. So typically, you see, like your big food retailers, they'll have experimentation labs. And once it works, then it's like, okay, now let's put it into manufacturing. And now let's scale it. So for me, and I think it was Y Combinator said this, when you go from startup to scale-up phase, because when you go to the scale-up phase, excuse the language, it's yours to F it up. The startup phase, you might be too early, there's lots of unknowns. So for me, it's that startup, experiment, pivot, scale up. You should know what you're doing. And now it's just making sure you get money in the bank to scale what it is that you're doing.
Makes sense.
I think quite often people talk about product market fit during these phases. I think we are entering a phase where there isn't just one fit. So Slack, for example, they initially had product market fit with their first product, which was a massive multiplayer online game. People know that. They had 200 people using this game who loved it. They couldn't get more people. So they had product market fit, but the product worked for this select group of people, but they didn't have business market fit. So they weren't able to make enough money from that base of customers to scale what they did. So again, sometimes product market fit, people think it's just about people. I've proven people want this. But it's okay, will they want it at scale? Will they keep buying it? Is there a business behind this? Why did Tesla go from the Roadster to maybe the most boring car ever now, the Model, what is it, Model Y, the world's biggest, and they've dumbed everything down, they've made it all, they've gone for business market fit with that because they can scale it, the amount of money they can make is billions and billions and billions opposed to a little bit of a billion.
I love the pivoting the recipe. I think that's definitely a line I'll take. Yeah. And I suppose it's interesting in terms of that product market fit is I suppose the TAM, right? The market you get to go after and how big that is. And that example, I suppose you give them with Slack there, it's the niche is too small. As in, there's people that are interested in it, but it's only 200 people, right? What are your thoughts on going after a niche which is big enough and then really kind of drilling down on that, but also considering that you need to have a kind of wider market where you can start then scaling up?
Yeah, good question. I think niches instead of niche, I would use the word focus.
Mm-hmm.
I really like startups who have one problem they're trying to solve for one particular customer with one business model and one way of going to market initially.
Mm-hmm.
I think great startups struggle when they spread themselves too thin.
Mm.
I always worry with my investor hat on when I'm looking at a investment deck and someone's saying, we're making money these 5 different ways. If you think about, Google, for example, the main core way they initially made money was one product.
Mm.
It was just AdWords. That's it. And yes, they could have focused on other things, but I think that focus is a distraction because as a startup, you have a limited resource. So when you start your startup, your founding team hopefully has as much experience, but they're as senior as you can get until realistically your business gets to Series A. Because it's only at Series A can you afford to buy or hire the more experienced people in the market. So your resources are limited, so you need focus. So niches, I think, is the wrong word because niche says it must be really, really small. I think focus. So, can you really nail this problem for this customer? And are there lots of people out there? And then, then you can go and launch new products or go into different markets. But having that focus is key.
Does that focus flow into KPIs as well? Do you think that there needs to be a very tight focus from the kind of startup, or is the startup kind of dealing with more qual information and KPIs?
I think it really depends if you're a B2B startup or a consumer startup,
Mm-hmm.
direct to consumer. I think they're two. I don't know, it feels even more at a startup phase, even more extreme because B2B startups, in my experience, initially, it's the founder who's winning the business quite often. So the real KPIs for me for a B2B startup is non-founder sales.
Mm.
So you take Motivi. So the first, my startup, I started 8 years ago. My first 10 deals were with some really big names. And investors would look at that and go like, wow. But those 10 names, I knew those 10 people, those 10 senior people in those 10 senior organizations. So they were buying. If I hadn't known them, I would never be able to sell to them. My contact got me in the door. So when I look at B2B startups now, my KPI I'm looking for is, are you selling? Is it non-founder selling? For a consumer startup, it's completely different. I'm looking at your return on ad spend. I'm looking at your your social metrics. I'm looking at how many customers are you winning. And in a way, and this is what I mean, it's harder almost for a direct consumer startup in the initial phase because you can't leverage that personal connection that you have unless you happen to be an influencer, unless you happen to be. So, I've done some work with Delicious Ella, for example. So Ella, Ella Mills wrote an amazing vegan food book. I think Jamie Oliver, but for vegan food. So then when she launched her products, she could write on her name, which was, obviously gonna massively discount the amount of marketing spend that you need to get in there. So yeah, you think again, if you don't have marketing spend, and you don't have virality, you must be looking at partnerships from a consumer point of view. You think back to Credit Expert and Experian in the early days. We went out there and we did deals with Martin Lewis at Money Saving Expert, AOL, Microsoft. We built the money centers. In a way, that was a B2B sell to get to a direct consumer customer. So your question around what are the KPIs I'm looking for around the business model effectively, which is why I think business model fit is better than product market fit. If you have a B2B business, for every one non-founder salesperson, how many sales do you do? In how many days?
Well, look, it's really interesting, that point. I think kind of working in B2B startups, obviously, that where you've got an individual that's got a background associated with the company and they do have those ins, that means it's quite powerful, especially through channels like LinkedIn, where you can leverage that and you can get kind of engagement outside of just the business. But yeah, it's interesting to say, does that runway run out, as it were? Is there only a certain amount of people you can engage? And then if you start scaling things up, does that fail? And yeah, it's interesting.
I think you can boost it with smart money investors. So with early stage, when you're raising in seed, those investors that you get on board, you don't want just money. You want people who are super connected. So we had in Motivi a guy called Michael Edelstein. So he was the global head of NBC Universal TV. So he produced Downton Abbey, Desperate Housewives. And he's like, hey, Eamon, can you get down to Sky's office next Tuesday? You got a meeting with Jeremy Darroch, who's the CEO of Sky. Like, I would never be able to get in there on my own.
That's a door opener, certainly.
It's a massive door opener. And there's lots of examples like that. And sometimes what happens is almost there is a negative flip side because you can get introduced too senior, too well, and then that person will then encourage the people who are reporting to them, in my case, HR, hey, you must look at this product. And then the question is, are they buying your product for the real reasons or another reason? Again, I think B2B sales is, again, why product market fit doesn't work, because the best product does not win from a B2B sale.
Right. Go and unpack that then.
Okay. So for me, when you're selling a B2B product, it's what makes that person you're selling to the most well thought of. It makes that person, are they likely to be promoted if they buy your product? Are you too much of an early stage startup? So we had a brilliant relationship with RBS. At Motivi. So we got into their innovation team who loved us. We did a formal paid pilot. Again, paid pilots are really important. Free pilots for B2B, I don't believe. We can come on to that. We had, they used us for 6 months, 200 plus people. We improved motivation by 18%, happiness by 12%. When asked, do you want to continue using Motivi? 96% of staff said yes. And then when it came, we were thinking, brilliant, we're going to get rolled out across RBS. But then the feedback from the wider HR outside the innovation team was, no, you're too small, it's too risky. We want to go with Workday and a Facebook solution implemented by IBM. We had the best product. Yeah, we had the best product. And I would say that. Staff voted, we had the quantifiable metrics, but we didn't win because our business model as a startup working with a large enterprise was too risky for them.
Well, that literally is the IBM rule, because you've got an actually example in case where
They'll get
gets
by
sold.
IBM.
Exactly.
Exactly. So for me, it's about when you're selling B2B, it's about really understanding, and this is one of the things that I coach, especially early stage founders, because they so believe their product. And they come out of these meetings and go, I can't believe they didn't buy the product. I'm like, but do you know how long that person was in the role for? Do you know who their boss is? Do you know what do you know when their financial year is? Do you know, will your product help them get promoted or fired? I don't know about, I've not thought about that. So it's that psychology, I think, is really important to understand. And again, early stage startup, you as the founder must be doing that, or someone in the founding team. Yeah, ideally you have someone in charge of product, someone in charge of sales, someone in charge of tech. As a minimum, you want someone who leads on the internal development of the product, so tech, and then you want that external chief evangelical officer going out selling. And then, when you're selling and you're understanding what the buying signals are, how to really get your product over the line, then you're encouraging your other sales juniors to replicate that and then scale it. But it's really getting into the psychology of what you're doing and not just focusing on the product is important.
And it's really interesting, your points there around emotion and how much that plays a part, and also kind of understanding the decision-making unit when it's kind of B2B, and understanding it, well, you might get massive buy-in in certain departments and then you blocked elsewhere. So knowing how that works. Yeah. Just, I suppose, moving then on to channels and go to market, again, moving from a startup to scale up, and you've obviously seen both sides. Are you a kind of proponent of, one channel initially, and you're likely to get classic 80-20 rule, 80% of your sales or your sign-ups from that channel? Or are you best to have a kind of mix to then move into kind of scaling up to be able to prove other channels that work?
I think you need to focus, going back to the earlier point we were discussing, focus on a channel that you can unlock. What can you unlock in the quickest way in relation to the budget that you have? So, B2B like LinkedIn, and how do you use every trick in the book? Whether you're using things that are guessing at people's email addresses, you're then contacting those people directly, you're building a process, I think, is really important from a B2B perspective. From a direct to consumer, I think you look at like the early days of Credit Expert, we had no above the line budget. It was, you can get as many customers as you like, but we'll only pay £7 per customer. There was no radio, TV. So we had to go out there. I would argue, so this is back in 2004. So a while ago. We were doing growth marketing, growth hacking before it even became cool. Some would say it's not cool. I think it is. But we'd go out there, we'd be doing CPA deals. We would be doing innovative things. We would be, we'd do things like we would take our publishers, the people we work with, out and build, improve that relationship. These are some really B2B things we did in a consumer perspective, but we had that relationship. We got to know the businesses really well. So you take Yahoo, for example, We got to know their senior team. And when Facebook launched in the UK, guess who happened to be leading that? It was the team that was poached by Facebook from Yahoo. And we did, I don't know if you can remember, but we did a crazy deal where we bought 2 months of all of Facebook's inventory in the UK. That was for me, that's a B2B deal. But we then, we then saturated that channel. Like, it's a great example of saturation, because by the end of those 2 months, I think there've been so many complaints about credit expert adverts on Facebook in the UK that we actually got banned for like 4 or 5 months. They were like, we need to take a break from you. And as you look at it from with a paid search point of view, your cost per acquisition is going up and up. And obviously you're always doing a blend of CPA, but it gets to the point where, hang on, and I quite like old school marketing theory. So like the AIDA funnel, awareness, interest, desire, action. If you're playing just on action harvesting, you're not farming or seeding demand higher up in the funnel. So that's when, I remember our first TV ad. Again, we didn't go prime time. It was a stick man on some Sky channel that we got really cheaply. And then we saturated Sky, and then you go prime time. So I think saturation is more a consideration within direct to consumer. B2B, I think it's more trying to build up joined up processes. So whether you're using, so we did things like integrated intercom with Pipedrive, with Mixmax, with Hello Norbert, with like a bunch of stuff. You can possibly do all that mostly now on HubSpot, I guess. But whether you want to get stuck into that is a whole other subject. And I think when I hear startups go, we've tried that channel, it just doesn't work, I'm like, have you really tried it in depth? Have you spoken to experts such as yourself who can help them really really dive in? And I think then you have a international expansion thing to think about. So product market fit, I think, or business model fit resets every time you go into a new market. Sometimes I see people, they've not really gone deep, or they don't achieve product market fit, if you want to use that term, in their home market, whether we're talking about UK startups or I deal a lot with international startups, and they try and expand too quick into another market. And that is a real pull on resource. Like going back to the recipe example, I think the best example, have you heard of Mexican Coke?
No.
So Mexican cola, so American cola is made, I might get this the wrong way around. American cola is made with sugar cane. Mexican cola is made with sugar beet. Or it's the other way around. I think it's the other way around, actually. The cane is Mexico. So it's still Coca-Cola. And they talk about this recipe never changing, but they tweak it for every market. So even Coca-Cola, which is like the most generic product, isn't really a generic product. They're tweaking it for every market. But that takes research, that takes time, that takes focus. So I think, circling back to your question, make sure you go and try every trick in the book in a channel that you're focusing on. So like LinkedIn is really, like there's so much learning and research and articles out there. I get quite annoyed sometimes when people ask me a question. I'm like, have you Googled that question? So there's lots of examples about how to build brilliant, B2B SaaS lead generation, acquisition models, and piping that into your sales team. So make sure you go deep in each channel. And then when you've saturated that channel, the question is, do you go into other channels, or then do you go into other adjacent markets?
And as you say, a lot of it's about kind of execution as well as the idea around the channel, right? And if you don't have the execution and you write it off, then potentially you've not kind of discovered it.
Execution, right? I got a bugbear. Okay. So execution. Okay, so marketing, creative. One of my challenges, and look, my early career was in marketing and advertising, so I'm biased to say this. But I wouldn't look at a developer's code and go, oh, you need to refactor that code, or it's a bit messy, or I don't have that knowledge, nor do I have that experience. But from a marketing, from a naming, from a branding point of view, I find too many people get involved with not enough experience in that space. So, for example, I might be with a client. I won't name clients in this example. I might be with a client where we'll produce some creative, or the agency we're working with might produce some creative, and non-marketing creative people are having a comment. So have you heard of the hippo in the room? Yeah. It's the highest paid person's opinion. And sometimes, I had it once, the CFO was moaning about the way the creative looked. And the product was for a lower demographic consumer. This CFO was driving like a high-end Merc, like they weren't that same person. They're a CFO. And talking to them, I'm like, have you run marketing teams? Have you, et cetera, et cetera? Like, the answer is no. But just because it's creative, it's easy to comment on. So my point I'm making, I think startups, it's really important to think about marketing, brand, and engaging with people who've got real experience, who can help you, because quite often when I get involved with early stage startups, they think they're doing everything, and you look at their website, their sales deck, their brand, and I'm sorry, but it's crap. And it's not at the level that it needs to be. I think it's even harder for non-UK startups coming into the UK. Because you take I'm working with a bunch of LATAM B2B startups. And the way they promote their products is very factual. It's not emotive. Whereas the UK actually, we have quite an emotional B2B sell. And actually, we want something to look a certain level. So there's this subconscious bias that if I look at something and it looks crap, I'm not going to buy. And sometimes it could be that, it can be so subtle. I look at it and go, oh, it looks a bit basic. And it might be amazing. Or if it looks a bit basic and, oh, I'm not going to buy this. If I buy it and it messes up, I might lose my job. I might look bad in front of my boss. So I think it's really important that early stage startups think, they don't dismiss marketing, advertising, branding. I think these are really key principles to get right and can be a core ingredient in helping you scale.
And I completely agree. And it's kind of understanding the customers intricately as possible, right? To say the CFO doesn't have an opinion about something without knowing what the customer is actually kind of thinking, and would be able to like play it out in that way to get that emotional kind of resonance. So yeah, I agree. Just moving things on, because I know a huge amount of time. Your view, you mentioned there the kind of team dynamics. What have you seen, again, moving from a startup to a scale up? How you consider growing a team from like the early core team to which team members you position first, and how you get teams to work together as things scale up?
Yeah. So I think the thing to bear in mind, so you go from startup, just you and your co-founder. Ideally, if you're a sole founder, I recommend you go out and find a co-founder and be flexible. Like that what happened 3 years later. Co-founder businesses achieve higher exits. They are more successful. They also actually fail quicker, which is good. And failing quick is good. It's not a bad thing. So the thing to remember, you go from like 1 or 2 people, let's say a scale up, let's just do easy. Yeah, let's say scale up, you're about is late seed, Series A. So you're now doing 100 grand plus a monthly recurring revenue. You're most probably at that stage around 25 people-ish average. You would have must have gone through, to go from 2 to 5 to 10 to 15 to 25. You've gone through must be 3 cultural cycles there.
Mm.
The way you manage people is going to be completely different. The way you're going to have to change around, you go from a founder who's out winning the sales from a B2B point of view, or a founder, in AdWords optimizing PPC, to now being a founder who I've got someone in my team doing that. I think what I would encourage startups to start defining is what their values are internally. And values are the rules of how we work together. So defining that becomes an operating system. So I think even though the culture changes, the values shouldn't change during that period. So I think the challenge with first-time founders in their 20s is they haven't managed people. But I look back to Experian, I look back to being, I don't know, 24 years old and managing people. I never managed people before. And I must be a crap manager. But what was great about Experian is, and many other organizations, is they put me on management training courses. I started to learn, situational leadership. I started to learn, Belbin, Myers-Briggs, and again, like, there's been bad about all these things, but you're growing as an individual. And I think I only really got into my stride as a manager in my 30s. So sometimes, startups you might be that mid-seeds phase. And actually, they're thinking too much about product market fit and transactional activities opposed to team culture, empowerment, and putting systems in place. So some startups initially go, we don't want any rules. We're a startup. We want to just play it fast and loose. But for me, that's like, I know you like rugby. Yeah, it's like playing rugby with the lines on a rugby pitch not marked out. Like, where do I kick off from? Where's the try line? So I think it's putting the frameworks in place. So, values are a framework. Putting in, for example, you might have your official HR booklet with all the legal stuff in, but like a book around this is how we work. This is our philosophy to growing, and people as an individual feel like, I think like performance development plans are brilliant, putting time in where you really connect. So I'm a fan of KPIs when it's around evaluating a business. But the problem with focusing too much on a KPI as a startup is it's an end output metric. So this is the return on ad spend. This is, what our sales ratio is. This is what our LTV is. That doesn't take into account how people are feeling. I've had salespeople, marketing execs, whatever, like smashing it from a KPI point of view, but they might not be happy. And actually, I think thinking about how motivated are my employees, how bought in are we? A great book to read is Dan Pink. Talk about motivation. He talked about motivation is autonomy, mastery, and there's a third one. But thinking about those things is just as important as what channel do we go in next. I think this is why second, third, fourth time founders, if you look at Harvard Business Review, are more successful, whether their second, third time is following a successful or not successful period, is you learn.
Yeah.
Your IQ doesn't change, but your experience does. And that enables you, I think, to make more informed, intelligent decisions.
Makes sense. Yeah. And what's your view on in-house people versus agencies? And when is it best to bring in-house in terms of expertise, and when is it best to rely on consultants or agencies?
It's a brilliant question. Like, we both offer consultancy services. Let's just talk about that honestly. For me, I think I'm a proponent of always having an internal team. I love an internal team. Because these are people who live and breathe what you do. They can get behind the values. You think about credit expert experience. We effectively built an internal agency within the business. We did all our media planning buying ourselves. We did all our creative ourselves. That allowed us to get around agency rules. However, as a startup, you often don't have that resource, or you don't have also not just the resource, but you don't know how to manage that resource. So I think getting consultants in when you're mid-seed can really make a big difference. The thing that people need to bear in mind, so that first year, your first raise in the UK is easy because you raise it under SEIS. Hopefully, investors, are getting 50% back straight away. If you fail, they get another 40% back. So the capital exposure is really limited. You start off on a dream. It's exciting. You then fast forward, you're 3-4 years in. Money in the bank's running out. I think it's really important at that time to get, and you've not achieved product market fit yet. For me, you're in this valley of death phase. I think getting experts in at that point to really kick the tires and really help you is really valuable. And sometimes you might not get the answer you want. Sometimes those experts might come and go, this isn't working. Like, you need to fold, or you need to change, or but you need to do something different. I think then, so your next big senior hire is when you're doing your late seed round Series A. This is where you've got enough money to go out and hire the best talent at market rate. And that's the thing. In seed, unless you're, really well funded and capitalized, you mostly don't have the capital to buy or hire the best people in the market. Hence why fractional talent to support you makes a big difference. And then so then post Series A, it's sort of a blend.
Makes sense. Eamon, we've gone way over, but thank you so much for your time and so much useful content in there. The last question that I ask here is, what's the one best piece of advice you could recommend to a founder moving from that startup phase to that scale-up phase?
The best advice I'd give a founder just generically is never say no to a meeting. Never say no to a networking opportunity. Never say no to being invited somewhere. The amount of people I've bumped into and made connections with, and some instances really good friends with, and not only from a business point of view, has been in the serendipitous kind of meetings. So for me, I would never say no to a meeting. What advice would I give specifically to a founder moving from startup to scale-up phase? I wouldn't give any, to be honest. I would give advice to a founder in startup phase, or I give advice to a founder in scale-up phase. But if you're moving in between, brilliant, well done. Like you've achieved it. The advice I'd give a startup in startup phase is like, when you're going to be a scale-up, like what are the metrics that matter to you? Map that out. Don't map out who is going to buy you in 5 years' time. Map out how you're going to achieve product market fit, business market fit. Does your team know what that is? Do they know what's behind those metrics? That should be part of your near-term horizon goals, effectively.
Makes sense. Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
And thanks everyone. I look forward to the next session.